General MacArthur drops a atomic bomb.
So here we go with round 2 for NATO, or the Allied forces. Starting off, the U.S. European Command has bought a tank, a transport and aircraft carrier, and 2 research dice. So for research dice, it works just like diplomacy. You pay 10% of your income from the IPC chart to determine how much you pay for dice. For the United States, however, because it's such a big power, you'll take 10% from both of its incomes to equal how much you pay for a dice. Now, you can either subtract the 10% from both, or you can just take a full 20% from one of the single incomes. Then we got NATO, who also, let's see, NATO bought 1 research dice. They bought 3 transports, 2 destroyers, and 2 Gloucester jet fighters. And then we come across the map here. U.S. Pacific Command bought a transport, a marine infantry, an armor unit, and a destroyer. And the SATO forces bought 3 infantry, a marine, a tank, and a transport. So real quick, we'll quickly do the technology rolls. We'll start with NATO. And NATO is going to attempt the heavy tank, try and get the heavy tanks research. And they rolled a 2, so they failed. And the U.S. is going to go for the advanced R&D to unlock their tech tree, or their national tech tree. And unfortunately, they failed too. So with the technology resolved, we will go into setting up the attacks, and we'll get going on the attack portion of turn 2. Okay, so going into the attacks. So the NATO Army of the Rhine is going to push into Germany to launch an attack against the Soviets there. Down here, NATO is going to attempt a landing in Albania. And then follow that up with this U.S. battleship getting a freebie over here, getting those 2 communist transports. And then the U.S. 7th Fleet will be launching their amphibious assault against the Chinese-controlled Japan. Now, just for quick reference, just wanted to show it. So all of this NATO force here on the Army of the Rhine board will be going in and going up against all of these Soviet troops. So we'll see how all this goes. Oh, and real quick. So after the anti-aircraft guns, if this airborne infantry survives, the rule for paratroopers is much like HBG's rule for Marines, but we've also applied it to paratroopers as well. For if they are conducting a parachute drop, for their first time in combat, they hit on a 2 or less. For the first turn they're in combat, they hit on a 2 or less. But then after that, they revert back to their standard 1 for attack and 2 for defense. So we'll roll these battles out and we'll see how it all goes. Okay, well, combat did not quite go the way the Allies wanted it. So, due to subpar rolls on the Allied side and superb dice roll from the Soviets, the entire NATO Army of the Rhine got pretty much destroyed. The remnants, some of the remnant aircraft fell back to France and Belgium, Holland, and now there is only a token force defending West Germany at this point. The Allies are in a rough spot now in Germany. It was a bloodless landing at Albania. The NATO took that without losing anybody. Over here in the Pacific, obviously the U.S. battleship was able to knock out those 2 enemy transports, no problem. And just like in Albania, the offshore bombardment basically allowed the Americans to walk right back into Japan. So that is the results of the combat. As I said, NATO and the Allies are now in some deep trouble here in Central Europe, as pretty much we'll call it bad intelligence and a case of overconfidence has now led the Allies into a potential disaster in Europe. So we'll see in turn 3 how this all plays out, but right now we'll do the strategic moves and place the reinforcements, grab the IPC, and we'll end turn 2. So wrapping up for the Allied team, the Allies are deploying and starting to try and get as many troops to Europe as possible because of the disastrous NATO attack in Germany. So we got a little convoy heading from the States. We've had some transport aircraft transport 2 airborne divisions and an anti-aircraft gun from the States into Portugal. The Americans got one of their convoys and have offloaded in Belgium and Holland. The British, the NATO forces in Scotland deployed an infantry and an armor division into West Germany to at least maybe try and soften the blow that the Soviets will probably hit them with next. Trying to shore up the defenses in northern Italy. Just at this point, all the Allies are trying to do is to try and get their defenses shored up in Western Europe as quick as possible before the Soviet juggernaut really gets them down. NATO's also trying to get some more assets into the Mediterranean to counter the Soviet fleet that broke itself out. NATO is bringing some reinforcements into Pakistan to help Nato against the incoming Soviet attack. At this point, the Soviets might be rethinking their efforts in trying to attack in Pakistan. Probably just sit there and hold it. Over in Southeast Asia, NATO is consolidating their forces in North Vietnam and over in Myanmar. They've also started building up a decent task force around the Philippines to give them some options of where they might be able to try and launch an amphibious assault against China. The United States has been able to move reinforcements into Japan in anticipation for the next communist attack that's more than likely going to come in the next turn, and just getting more forces deployed. Sorry about that. So that is the end of the Allies' turn 2. While things in the Pacific seem to be sort of, I guess I wouldn't call it a stalemate yet, but things look like they're growing to a stalemate. But as I keep saying, things in Europe are not looking good for the Allies. So we'll just have to see what turn 3 brings, what horrors turn 3 brings to the game. So that's it for now. Until turn 3.